Blossom is a social platform for retail investors, so think like Twitter, Reddit, but instead on Blossom, your profile is your actual investment portfolio that you share publicly with everyone else in the community. This isn't necessarily like a new behavior. People are already sharing their portfolio and what they're doing and investing in online. The idea of Blossom is to build a community in transparency. So, you go onto Reddit or Twitter or these other existing social platforms that aren't built for investors, and you actually don't know what this user who you're reading about and you're reading their posts, you don't know what they're actually doing. You don't know if they're putting their money where their mouth is. And so on Blossom, we've built this community really baked in transparency, where you can share exactly what you're doing, why you're doing it, when you're doing it. On Blossom, you actually link your brokerage directly. So if you trade with Wealthsimple or Questrade or BMO or whatever, you can link your brokerage directly. And so when you place a trade or make an investment, it automatically shares it with the community right away. And you get a notification on Blossom that says like, why did you make this trade? Why did you invest in this? And you actually share your insights and your rationale with the community. For us back in 2021 when we first started Blossom, I was just getting into investing. My co-founder Max was getting into investing. And at the time, there was this whole, I'm sure you remember, GameStop, Reddit fiasco going on. And that really opened our eyes to the impact that social media has on people's investing behavior and how dangerous it can be, and how social media isn't always giving people the best advice, despite the fact that nowadays the younger generation is going directly to social media to get their investing advice. People aren't going to financial advisors as much. They're turning more towards online. They're turning towards their friends and family. But for myself at least, when we first started Blossom, I didn't see myself in like the traditional investor. I didn't have a community of people I could turn to ask these things. And when I went online, it was kind of like a scary place. It wasn't somewhere that I would necessarily want to go to learn about investing. And so that's kind of why we built Blossom in the first place. We wanted to see if we could build a community, a social community that is online, that is meant for the everyday investor. We've grown our community to 800,000 users now in the last 4 years. I would say like 1 in 10 millennial investors now in Canada are on Blossom, which is really, really cool. Half of our community is now in the US, so we're continuing to expand in the US. But it's been really positive. People are really excited to share what they're investing in. That was kind of like a hesitation when we first started Blossom, was like, okay, are people actually going to link their brokerage and share what they're doing? But people are more than happy to do so. I think people are really seeking community in everything they do, not just investing, but especially investing. People want to share and they want to, just be a part of something bigger than themselves. We've been very, very intentional with how we've built Blossom. I think the whole reason our community and our product is so successful is because we are all about building trust. Like Blossom wouldn't be successful or exist without trust. Trust is our product. And so with the social proof, we've been very intentional with every single product decision that we make, asking ourselves, is this going to help someone become a better investor? And it's really difficult to do because we're a business at the end of the day, right? So we want our product to be sticky. We want people to come around and stay online and engage and all that stuff. So it's really easy to fall into this trap that most social medias are, which is how to get you to stay on the platform as long as possible until your brain rots. It's also really cool. We give like a lot of like statistics and like data that people can look into that you wouldn't get anywhere else. So let's say, for example, you're interested in a specific ETF or stock. You can actually go on Blossom and see like how many people hold that particular product, how many people have sold it in the last 30 days. Is it, what is the most popular ETF or stock that people are talking about right now? So there's just like much richer insights that you literally can't get anywhere else. There's so much psychology behind money in general, but there's the market psychology, which is more of like that short-term emotional reactivity side of investing. So, when the market dips, how do you react? Do you pull all of your money out, or you see this as an opportunity to invest more? When you're doing really well because the markets are doing well, are you blowing all your money now because you're like, oh my God, I'm a millionaire now? Or are you like, yeah, like how are you reacting to these short-term effects? So there's that very interesting psychology behind market psychology. But then there's also what we've seen, this longer term emotional response, which I would frame as like more money psychology, right? So every single person has a different experience with money. Everyone carries, probably some form of trauma or some level of understanding of money in a different way. I can speak for myself. I came from an immigrant family. Money was always tight for us growing up. And so for me, my money psychology that I've learned about myself through doing Blossom, which is really cool, is that I do carry trauma around money, and I don't want to worry about it. And so for me, the best method of investing is the set it and forget it. I don't want to look at it. Looking at it actually causes anxiety for me. Whereas on the flip side, there's maybe some folks who grew up seeing their parents take these big risks, and it paid off for them, and it was amazing, and they saw the impact, the healthy impact that investing can have on them. And so they're going to behave in a much different way when it comes to investing than someone like myself, or someone who carries a trauma in a different way. And so I think when it comes to any form of like social proof that you're looking for, whether that's on Blossom, whether that's through just your own research, through watching videos, whatever, it's so important to understand your own like deeper money psychology in addition to your market psychology, which is more of like your short-term reactions. The boring answer, I guess, is like we're really strict about our community guidelines on Blossom. And so if we see people promoting something that, or like even things like trade signals, like we're really iffy about that, because that can kind of turn into murky waters really quick. And we've had a user on the platform before who was posting constantly, and it was getting so much engagement, and people loved it and were following him and whatever. And objectively, as a social media platform, this is awesome. We have a really engaged person who's posting all the time. He's getting followers. He's creating engagement. But deep down, we knew that this wasn't really aligned with why we built Blossom. And there are other platforms out there that already exist where they can go and do that, and that's probably a better community. And so we had to make like a difficult decision of like, do we keep this person on our platform or not, or do we remove them? We ultimately removed them, but that was like a very difficult decision for us as a business, because objectively, this is the user, like this is a great user. They're creating so much engagement. It's really exciting, but it just, didn't align with our values. We're a business. 80% of our revenue comes from media revenue. So this is a huge bucket for us. We're very, very intentional about choosing the partners that we work with. We will never work with a company, no matter how much they're offering us, that doesn't align with our values, doesn't align with what our users are looking for. And all of the content that gets generated in an advertising format on Blossom is always very educational. And we kind of like set that as our standard when we're working with any brands. So for example, like 9Point, we worked with them and we did what we call a learn and earn. And so, 9Point has this really awesome suite of ETFs that are all about covered calls. Covered calls is, a topic that's really interesting for DIY investors, and that a lot of DIY investors might not know too much about. And so we did this entire video series where we taught people what covered calls are. And then, at the very end, we'll talk about the products that 9Point has around that. But it's the importance of it, or the reason why we're doing it, is education first. First one is expanding to the US, and something that maybe is like interesting for the audience is like we've learned how different the American DIY investor is from the Canadian DIY investor, which was very surprising to us. Like in some ways it's like obvious, of course they're different, they're a whole different, culture and everything, but it's different like Canada is much more conservative, and so like Canadian and DIY investors we've seen they love ETFs. Not that Americans don't, but they love ETFs in Canada. They obviously have a little bit of their home base bias and all of that kind of stuff. American investors we've seen fall much more easily into this trap of hopping on the latest trends, what's viral. They're really into stock picking. They're much more inclined to take risk. So it's very interesting to see the differences there, and also building our platforms for the two audiences has been really interesting. The other thing that we're thinking about as a company is we've tapped into this one part of the DIY investor, but as an individual grows their wealth, they're probably more likely to want to get like a second opinion from an expert or a professional. Like, I think once you hit a certain level of wealth, maybe you don't want to manage it on your own anymore. Maybe you do want someone else to kind of like jump in. And so we're thinking as a company, like, how can we be a part of this person's money journey, like no matter where they are? I grew up in an immigrant family. My mom was an immigrant, my dad's an immigrant as well, and so we grew up like not very well off, and money was always, kind of like a sticking point for us as a family. We were always concerned about it, but I think the great part of that is they inherently like taught us a lot about money. They taught us the importance of saving, and thankfully my mom was like a huge driving force in both my life and my brother's life of teaching us about investing. She truly came from nothing, and through investing was able to save for me and my brother's education. She helped us, put a down payment on my first home and my brother's first home as well, which is just like incredible. And I know we're like very, very privileged and lucky to have that. But all of those things, like, she wouldn't have been able to do unless she was investing. And so we were lucky enough to have her teach us these concepts at a very young age, which I know a lot of people don't get. And I think going through that struggle as a kid and into a life where I'm able to go to school and I'm able to have my own home and see that like transformation. And then again, like working at the bank as well, where I got to interact with everyday people who maybe didn't have access to that type of education growing up. It really opened my eyes to how important financial literacy is, and how like crazy enough inaccessible it kind of is, and they don't teach these things at school. I remember, maybe just like an anecdote to share, at the bank I remember, this like isn't investing related, but at the bank I remember a 19-year-old kid coming in with his mom, and I was like, oh, you're eligible to open a credit card now. And she told him, like, never open a credit card. Like, credit cards are super dangerous. Like, you can fall into this trap of credit cards. And I was like, oh, that's so like misinformed, but I don't want to like step on a boundary and like kind of correct her, so I kind of just left it. But it was just very eye-opening to see the lack of financial literacy that people have access to.